He looked straight through me as if I were nothing more than a shadow on the rain-slicked dock. The wind whipped around us, carrying the stench of wet concrete and spoiled produce, but I barely noticed. My hands ached from hauling crates that were far too heavy, my dress soaked through, sticking to me uncomfortably, and my hair plastered across my face. "I don't entertain gold diggers," he said, his voice colder than the marble floors of the hotel lobby behind him. The words landed like steel, sharp and deliberate. Around us, workers paused, shifting uneasily, unsure whether to intervene or keep their heads down. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my pride rising despite the chill and humiliation. "I'm not here for charity or for your attention," I said quietly, my fingers brushing mud from the corner of a crate. "I just want fair payment for what's ours. You almost ruined our shipment, but I saved it." His eyes, dark and unreadable, lingered on me for a fraction too long. He didn't blink. He didn't look impressed. He didn't even glance at the soaked crates behind me. He simply crossed his arms, towering silent, as if my words were nothing more than background noise. "Do you always speak this boldly?" His voice cut again, low and dangerous, each syllable designed to make me shrink. I met his gaze, refusing to falter. "Boldly enough to protect my people." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could hear the drizzle pounding on metal roofs, the distant wail of a delivery truck struggling through the mud. My heart thudded, but I refused to step back. I had no choice but to stand tall. I owed it to my village, to the school that counted on that shipment. His lips pressed into a thin line. I could almost see the shock flicker behind the wall of his cold eyes. He expected begging, trembling excuses. What he didn't expect was dignity, mine unshaken despite the mud, rain and exhaustion. The workers began moving again, whispers trailing behind them like cautious ghosts. None dared look him in the eye. None dared stand beside me. Only I remained, soaked, trembling and defiantly upright. Finally he turned, his coat swirling as he left, heels clicking sharply against the dock. "Keep your money," I whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear. "One day you'll wish you'd listened." The rain continued, but for the first time, I felt it wash away more than the mud from my dress. It washed away fear. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this storm had only just begun. 2 days later, the city seemed determined to remind me of my place. I was crossing the street near the hotel, clutching a small basket of fresh vegetables to sell at the market, when a black luxury car sped by. Mud flew in a sharp arc, splattering across my dress and hands. I gasped, wiping the filth away, and heard the snickers of the men inside, the guards. He didn't even look at me. The same man who had dismissed me at the dock now sat inside his car, expression cold, indifferent. And yet, I felt the weight of his gaze on me, even without his eyes meeting mine. I wanted to curse, to scream, to throw the basket at the car, but I didn't. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. Kindness is never wasted, even in the face of cruelty. So instead, I hurried to the edge of the street, where a small boy had tripped, scraping his knee. Blood darkened his pants, and his cries pierced through the city noise. Without hesitation, I knelt beside him, tore a corner of my soaked dress to wrap the wound, and soothed him with gentle words. From the tinted window of his car, I caught a flicker of something I wasn't expecting. His eyebrows twitched, a subtle shift that betrayed curiosity, maybe even concern. The cold facade remained, but beneath it, I could sense a fracture. When the boy's mother arrived, thanking me with tears in her eyes, I simply nodded. "Be careful next time," I said. Then, clutching my ruined basket, I walked toward the market. That night, as the city lights flickered and the rain returned, I heard him give an order I never thought I'd be part of. "Find out who that girl is, and why she isn't afraid of me." I didn't know it then, but those words marked the beginning of a storm far more powerful than rain and mud. A storm that would reach into my past, my village, and even into the icy walls around his heart. 2 days after the rain-soaked dock incident, the city seemed determined to remind me that I was small and powerless. The morning air was crisp but heavy with smog, the streets buzzing with honking cars and hurried footsteps. I carried a modest basket of produce from the village, my fingers numb from the cold, my dress still damp in places from the last storm. Every step was a struggle, but I had a debt to repay, to the school, to my village, and to the people who depended on me. I rounded the corner near the hotel when a sleek black car appeared, tires splashing water and mud across the narrow street. I froze, but too late. Mud struck my dress in a wide, wet arc, soaking the hem and dripping down my legs. My basket tipped, sending vegetables rolling into the gutter. A gasp escaped me, half anger, half frustration. Inside the car, his presence loomed. Mo Yifan, the CEO whose name sent tremors through the corporate world, sat behind the wheel with a carefully neutral expression. His guards laughed, the sound grating against my nerves. They thought this was a game. They thought that humiliating a poor village girl would amuse him. But I refused to let anger take me. I had more important battles to fight than petty vengeance. I dropped to my knees instinctively, salvaging what I could of the produce. My hands were coated with mud and grime, but I worked fast. The city continued its relentless pace around me. Drivers honking, pedestrians casting curious glances, but I ignored it all. I had to, because survival wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the debts that had been accumulating in my village for months, about the school that couldn't afford a single teacher's salary without my meager earnings. As I righted the basket, I noticed a small child sitting near the curb, rubbing a scraped knee with a piece of cloth he'd found. Blood had already darkened the fabric, and his tears glimmered like tiny jewels against his dirt-streaked face. Instinctively, I knelt beside him. "Hey," I whispered gently. "It's going to be okay." I tore a corner of my already soaked dress to fashion a temporary bandage, tying it around his wound carefully, trying not to let him flinch from my trembling hands. The boy sniffled, his eyes wide and uncertain. "Thank you, miss," he said, voice small. I offered him a soft smile. "You'll be fine. Just stay close to your mother next time." From the corner of my eye, I saw the black car slow, and for a brief, fleeting moment I thought I caught his gaze. Mo Yifan's expression was unreadable, but the faint twitch of his brow betrayed something I hadn't expected: curiosity. A subtle shift in the carefully controlled mask of indifference he always wore. He had expected fear, perhaps even tears, but instead he saw compassion. And that disturbed him in a way I couldn't yet understand. I gathered the remaining vegetables and trudged toward the market. My dress clung to me uncomfortably, my hair plastered to my forehead, yet there was a strange clarity in my steps. Each footfall was a reminder. I had chosen defiance over fear, dignity over submission, and somewhere, deep in that unspoken acknowledgement, Mo Yifan was watching. That evening the rain returned in heavy sheets, drumming against the city streets with relentless persistence. I was in my tiny rented room, washing the mud from my hands when the phone rang. It was his secretary, calling with instructions that would have been unimaginable a week ago. "Sir has requested information," she said, voice careful. "He wants to know who that girl is, and why she isn't afraid of him." I let the phone slip from my hands, my heart hammering. My mind raced. Why would a man like him, a man who had publicly shunned every woman who approached him, care about me? I hadn't bowed, I hadn't flattered, and I certainly hadn't begged. I had only acted with honesty and compassion. The thought both exhilarated and terrified me. I had entered a world of power and wealth without permission, without protection, and now, for reasons I couldn't fully grasp, I had caught his attention. But attention from someone like him was double-edged. It could bring opportunities, yes, but it could also unleash scrutiny, ridicule, and danger. I leaned against the wall, staring at the rain streaking my window. My village debts pressed on me like stones in my chest, the school's needs a constant echo. I had fought for them and I would continue to do so, but now I realized I was no longer invisible. Someone powerful was aware of me, and that awareness came with consequences I could neither predict nor control. Somewhere in that night I made a silent vow. I wouldn't flinch. I wouldn't bend. I would meet cruelty with courage, and indifference with honesty. And perhaps, just perhaps, in the face of all this I could find a way to change more than just my own fate. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the patter of rain against the tin roof, a thought lingered in my mind, unbidden and fierce. One day, he will understand that strength doesn't always come from power, and that fearlessness has a price only the brave are willing to pay. And somewhere far away I knew, Mo Yifan had already begun to wonder about the girl who refused to fear him. Before the city's towering glass and steel, before the cold stares and relentless judgment, there was my village, a place where kindness wasn't optional, it was currency. The morning mist clung to the valley like a soft blanket, wrapping the small cottages in muted silver light. Smoke spiraled lazily from chimneys, and the scent of damp earth mixed with firewood. This was home, the only place I had ever truly belonged, even if life had made it harsh and unforgiving. Our family was poor, but our hearts were rich. That richness, however, couldn't pay for my father's medical bills after the flood, or for the school that kept the village children learning. I was the oldest of 3 siblings, and after his death, responsibility landed squarely on my shoulders. My mother's hands were worn and trembling, her soft voice always urging me to do more, to keep going. "Xiaoyu," she would say, "you are the hope they all cling to. Don't let them down." I remember the night I first decided to leave for the city. Candlelight flickered against the walls of our tiny home, illuminating the cracks in the plaster, the worn wood of the furniture, and my mother's pale, anxious face. I had packed what little money we had, a few warm clothes, and a bundle of letters explaining my plan. "I'll find a way to pay off our debts, Mother. I promise," I whispered, my voice quivering despite my resolve. She grasped my hands tightly. "Xiaoyu, don't let the city swallow you. Keep your heart, even when it's hard." I nodded, biting back tears, and stepped into the night, carrying the weight of more than my own survival. In the city, every street corner, every neon-lit advertisement, every towering building was a reminder that I was small, insignificant. I had come to sell our village's produce, to meet buyers who cared little for honesty or fairness. And yet, in all that chaos, I tried to hold on to the lessons of home. Kindness, courage, and quiet defiance in the face of injustice. The first encounter with Mo Yifan was supposed to be another obstacle, another reminder that the powerful viewed us as expendable. But that night at the loading dock, when the rain poured and the shipment teetered on the edge of disaster, I acted without hesitation. My hands were cut and bruised, my clothes ruined, but I didn't stop. Because failure wasn't just personal, it would have hurt every family counting on that delivery. Even then, I never imagined the man who despised me so completely would become the one person who could alter the course of my life. His judgment, his coldness, even his curiosity. Everything about him was a mirror reflecting what I had fought to protect in myself. Dignity, pride, and courage. Back in my village, nights were spent by the warm glow of lanterns. I could hear my mother's soft breathing through her oxygen mask, a rhythm I had memorized long ago. Her presence anchored me, reminded me why I couldn't give in to fear or despair. I had promised myself, that I would never bow for injustice, no matter the price. It was in those quiet moments, as I tended to my chores or helped neighbors in need, that the resolve to face the city hardened. I had dreams once, dreams of becoming a nurse, of helping people in a more tangible way. But fate had pushed me into servitude to survive. Still, that spark never died. It fueled every action, every choice, and every silent stand I took in the bustling streets of the metropolis. And now, with Mo Yifan's shadow stretching across my life, I realized something that had been impossible to foresee. The person I had feared most, the cold, calculating CEO, was slowly becoming intertwined with my destiny. My courage, my defiance, and my commitment to my village had caught his attention. And in a world where the powerful often crushed the powerless without thought, that attention was both terrifying and thrilling. I never imagined the man who despised me would become my only hope. Yet, in the quiet corners of my heart, I felt it. The stirring of a connection, fragile but undeniable. One that would challenge both of us, test our convictions, and eventually redefine the meaning of strength, kindness, and even love. And somewhere, far above the foggy valley and the flickering village lights, I sensed that my journey with him had only just begun. The golden afternoon light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, casting long, warm shadows across the polished marble floor. For a moment I hesitated at the door, unsure whether I had the right to step inside. The building smelled of leather, expensive cologne, and something faintly metallic, the scent of power. I had never seen such wealth, and yet, standing there, I felt no envy, only resolve. He was seated behind his massive desk, the afternoon sun catching in his perfectly styled hair. And Mo Yifan looked as imposing as ever, tall, sharp-featured, unyielding. But there was something different today, a subtle shift in the rigid lines of his posture, a glimmer behind his dark eyes I hadn't noticed before. "You're punctual," he said, his voice low and even. "I didn't expect you to come." "I keep my promises," I replied, standing straight, arms at my sides. The basket of village produce I had brought lay on the corner of his desk, unceremoniously spilling tomatoes, leafy greens, and bundles of herbs. My dress, though pressed, was still simple, almost threadbare in comparison to his surroundings. He raised an eyebrow, studying me as if weighing my worth. "I've decided to offer you a contract." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. My heart stuttered. A contract? With him? I had barely survived our first encounters without humiliation, and now he wanted to partner with me? My mind raced with possibilities and fears. What was his game? Did he intend to exploit me? Or was this some twisted test of my courage? I nodded cautiously. "I'll listen." He slid the papers across the desk. I picked them up, examining the fine print, the legal jargon, the careful terms that promised repayment for the village's shipment, and more. It was generous, almost shockingly so, but there was the unmistakable undertone of a test. Every clause seemed designed to measure my integrity, my patience, my sincerity. "I don't want favors," I said, looking up. "I don't want charity. This isn't about you doing something good for me. It's about fairness." For a fraction of a second the cold, calculating mask cracked. I saw a flicker of surprise, maybe even admiration. He had expected groveling, excuses, or tears, but I offered honesty, straightforwardness, courage without arrogance. "You have principles," he murmured, almost to himself. "Unusual for someone in your position." I shrugged. "I have a village depending on me. If I bend for every powerful man who sneers at me, I fail them all." The room was silent except for the soft tick of the clock on the wall. I could feel him watching, studying, calculating. And yet I didn't flinch. The fear that had once held me hostage, the fear of his judgment, his dismissal, his power, was replaced by a strange exhilaration. Minutes passed. Then, with a motion that seemed almost reluctant, he leaned back in his chair. "Tear the check in half," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile brushing his lips. I looked down at the paper, then back at him, my eyes wide. My fingers shook slightly as I tore the check, the sound loud in the otherwise quiet room. The torn pieces fluttered to the floor, harmless yet bold, like a declaration. He didn't scowl. He didn't reprimand. Instead, that small, quiet smile lingered, a warmth that had been absent from his expression for years. For the first time I saw Mo Yifan not as a formidable, cold CEO, but as a man, someone capable of complexity, hesitation, even subtle amusement. "You're different," he said finally, his voice lower, almost reflective. "I suppose you'll learn that quickly if you continue testing me," I replied, my tone steady but not without a trace of mischief. He chuckled softly, a sound I had never imagined coming from him. It wasn't loud, not boisterous, not mocking. Just a simple, quiet acknowledgement that perhaps I had passed whatever unspoken test he had set. The sunlight shifted, painting both of us in gold and shadow. In that moment I realized something profound. This man, who had once looked through me as if I were invisible, was now paying attention. Truly paying attention. And I, despite every fear, every doubt, felt a spark of hope ignite inside me. I left the office that afternoon carrying more than produce or promises. I carried a small, fragile sense of recognition, that even in a world that often seemed ruled by power and indifference, honesty and courage could create change. even in someone as cold as Mo Yifan. When I stepped back into the busy city streets, the wind against my face felt different, as if the world itself had shifted slightly. Somewhere in the city he watched, thinking, calculating, and perhaps, just perhaps, starting to feel. And I walked on, knowing that my actions had done more than save a shipment. They had begun to melt the ice around a heart I never thought I could reach. Working side by side with Mo Yifan felt surreal. One day I was hauling crates of vegetables through rain-slicked streets, and the next I was in a high-rise office navigating spreadsheets, contracts, and proposals that affected not just our village but entire industries. The contrast was dizzying. The sleek glass walls, the hum of computers, the clicking of heels echoing in marble corridors, but somehow I found my footing. My hands, once accustomed to rough rope and wet crates, now turned pages and typed emails with equal precision. He didn't make it easy. Mo Yifan's expectations were exacting, his temper swift, and his standards nearly impossible to meet. Every decision was scrutinized, every suggestion tested. Yet, in the midst of his cold perfectionism, I began to notice subtle changes. He asked for my opinion not just once but repeatedly. He lingered near my desk to clarify small details. Sometimes I caught him watching me interact with staff or clients, his gaze lingering longer than necessary, but never in a way that felt intrusive. It was in the little moments that the real transformation occurred. One morning, I accompanied him to a meeting with suppliers who wanted to increase prices unfairly. He was ready to agree, the profit line in his spreadsheets shining like a shield. I spoke up calmly, explaining how these price hikes would hurt not just our village but others like it. Mo Yifan paused. He considered, then nodded, rejecting the proposal. "Why do you care?" I asked quietly as we left the room. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me, really looked, and said almost with a sigh, "Because you do." Those words struck me in ways I couldn't articulate. It wasn't a confession of love, not yet. It wasn't a declaration of vulnerability. But it was recognition, acknowledgement. And sometimes that's enough to begin breaking through even the coldest walls. Outside the office, life remained chaotic. City streets collided with our world of luxury and privilege, showing me how vast the gap was between the lives of those with power and those without. I tried to keep my focus on my village, ensuring our contracts were fair, and that the produce was delivered on time. Mo Yifan, once indifferent, began to intervene, not out of command but out of protection. He ensured safe transport, personally oversaw negotiations, and even intervened when our efforts were undermined by competitors. Rumors began to circulate quietly, whispers among staff about why the CEO, notorious for rejecting every woman, seemed to take notice of a simple village girl. I ignored the whispers as best I could, focusing on the work that mattered. But it was impossible to ignore the small changes in him. He no longer avoided my presence. Instead, he seemed to wait for it. Meetings, presentations, even boardroom decisions. He paused, consulted, and sometimes defended my suggestions without a word. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but I noticed. Each small act of care, each quiet acknowledgement, was a thread weaving a new pattern. A connection neither of us had anticipated. I had never intended to influence him this way. I hadn't come for power, prestige, or recognition. I had come to fulfill a promise to my village, to ensure that kindness and integrity still mattered in a world obsessed with wealth. Yet, in his evolving behavior, I saw the proof that influence could come from humility and courage. The man who once looked through me as though I were invisible was beginning to see me, not just as a tool or an inconvenience, but as a person, a force, a presence impossible to ignore. One evening, after a long day balancing spreadsheets and negotiating contracts, we walked out onto the balcony overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting orange and gold across the skyline. The hum of traffic below felt distant, almost soothing. I glanced at him and he looked back, eyes softened, a faint smile touching his lips. "Sometimes I wonder," he said quietly, "if I've been doing this all wrong." "Doing what?" I asked. "Running everything without noticing who it affects, without noticing people like you." His words didn't need explanation. I understood. And in that shared understanding an unspoken bond formed, a rhythm between us that neither power nor fear could break. Later, as I returned to my modest apartment, I reflected on how far we had come. Not just the journey from dockside mud to boardroom debates, but the small, imperceptible shifts that were changing him and perhaps changing me. I had taught him empathy through simple honesty. He had taught me that courage could be recognized, even by the most cold-hearted. And as night fell, I realized the undeniable truth. This was no longer just about produce, contracts, or survival. Something deeper was emerging. A quiet connection, fragile but persistent, weaving through every look, every word, every choice. "Why do you care?" I had asked. His answer, "Because you do," would echo in my mind for days. It was a beginning, and beginnings, no matter how small, could spark revolutions. Rumors spread like wildfire, faster than I could have imagined. By the time I arrived at the office that morning, whispers had already taken root in every corner. The CEO's new mistress is a village girl. I felt the sting of each word as if it were a cold wind slicing through my soaked clothes from the past rain. The employee's eyes followed me, a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and barely concealed amusement. I tried to ignore them, focusing on my tasks, on the contracts and produce negotiations that still needed attention. But the murmurs became impossible to ignore as messages and headlines began appearing on every screen. The local news had picked up the story. Photographs of me carrying vegetables beside a Mo Yifan sleek black car, photoshopped and sensationalized captions implying a secret romance. I clenched my fists, my chest tight, but I refused to cry. Pride and dignity are sometimes all a poor girl can rely on. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. Executives whispered behind closed doors, glancing at him with judgment in their eyes. Investors questioned his decision-making, the company's reputation teetering on the edge. And Mo Yifan, seated at the head of the table, didn't flinch. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't issue denial or excuses. Instead, he did something that no one expected. He called for a press conference. The media gathered in waves, cameras flashing, microphones poised, reporters hungry for scandal. I stood beside him, heart hammering, palms sweaty, dressed simply in the blouse and skirt I had purchased for occasions like this. I had no idea what he planned, but the faint flicker of determination in his eyes gave me courage. When the cameras rolled and questions were shouted, he spoke clearly, deliberately. "Some of you have questioned my judgment. You've speculated, written stories, and even insulted the young woman standing beside me. But let me be clear. This girl once saved my company's shipment, risking herself for nothing more than honesty and integrity. My company stands because of her courage. Judge me if you dare." The room went silent. I felt the weight of his words, the sincerity in them, the power behind them. His acknowledgement was a shield, a declaration, and a vindication. I had expected blame, fear, humiliation, but instead I received respect, even protection, in the most public way possible. Outside, the flashing cameras captured every angle. Reporters scribbled furiously, whispers of admiration mixed with disbelief. Investors exchanged glances, some skeptical, some relieved. But I didn't care about their opinions. I cared about the man who had finally chosen to acknowledge truth over appearance, honesty over convenience. Later, in the quiet aftermath, I found myself alone with him. He looked at me, expression unreadable, and I braced for judgment, a reprimand, or an apology I hadn't earned. Instead, he smiled faintly, almost shyly. "I don't care what they say," he whispered, barely audible over the bustle outside. "I need you here. Not for appearances. Not for business. For this moment, for everything that matters." I blinked, the words sinking slowly into my chest. Every insult, every rumor, every sneer from colleagues now seemed small in comparison to this truth. He valued me, not as a tool, not as a distraction, but as someone integral to his life and work. The next few days were chaos. Headlines screamed, social media erupted, and office gossip escalated to an almost unbearable crescendo. Friends and allies offered advice. Leave, protect yourself, hide. But I had never been one to retreat from responsibility. My village still needed me. My dignity still demanded I stand. And now, with him standing beside me in acknowledgement and protection, I felt a sense of invincibility I had never known. Yet, even amidst the triumph, I felt the tension rising. This wasn't over. Scandal brings attention, yes, but it also brings enemies, competitors, rivals, and those who resent a poor girl daring to walk among them with honor. I knew the path ahead would be dangerous. I knew that every step forward would be watched, judged, and tested. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of his presence. I wasn't afraid because he had chosen to fight for truth alongside me. That night, as I lay awake listening to the distant hum of the city, I replayed the press conference in my mind. Every flash of cameras, every word he had spoken, it was more than protection. It was faith, acknowledgement, and an unspoken promise that I wasn't alone in this battle. And in that quiet moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. I had begun to trust him. Not blindly, not without caution, but enough to know that whatever storms awaited, I would face them with someone who had finally seen me for who I truly was. My company stands because of her courage. Judge me if you dare. The night the board convened to challenge Mo Yifan's authority, a storm raged outside, slamming rain and wind against the skyscraper's panoramic windows. Lightning illuminated the tense faces of executives and investors, their eyes sharp with accusation. They called him reckless, foolish, unfit to lead. And yet, amidst their harsh whispers and pointed fingers, he remained calm, unflinching, his gaze occasionally flicking toward me. I stood near the edge of the room, heart-pounding, fingers clenched around the edge of my notebook. I had come prepared to defend my village, my work, and my honor, but I hadn't expected to witness the magnitude of what was happening. The men around the table were powerful, their words slicing through the air like knives, yet Mo Yifan met every attack with a composed, unyielding stare. "This company is not built on numbers alone," he said, his voice steady but strong enough to echo through the hall. "It is built on people, on integrity, and yes, on courage. And the courage of the girl beside me has reminded me of what leadership should truly be." Murmurs spread across the room. Shock. Disbelief. Some faces reddened in anger. Others softened with grudging respect. I caught the eye of one of the most vocal board members, a man whose arrogance I had already encountered. He scowled, clearly unprepared for Mo Yifan's declaration. I realized then that his words were more than just defense. They were a line drawn in the sand. He wasn't merely protecting me. He was protecting the principle I represented. The idea that honesty, courage, and integrity had value in a world dominated by greed and calculation. Despite the strength in his voice, I felt the tremors beneath the surface. This confrontation could ruin him, destroy the empire he had spent years building. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside, each flash of lightning echoing the tension in my chest. I wanted to step forward, to offer to leave, to protect him from the inevitable fallout, but I knew I couldn't. He was facing this not alone, but because I had chosen to stand beside him. Hours passed in heated debate. Threats were issued, ultimatums presented, and yet, he did not falter. Even as shareholders questioned his judgment, even as media coverage leaked to the public with speculation of collapse, he remained resolute. His only focus was the truth, and the courage of the girl standing quietly beside him. At one point he paused, looking directly at me, his eyes shadowed by fatigue and stormlight. "You can leave," he said quietly, a rare softness in his tone. "I won't stop you if you think staying is too dangerous." I shook my head, determination hardening in my chest. "I came this far. I won't abandon you, or what we're trying to protect." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. In that moment it was clear whatever happened next, we faced it together. And together we were stronger than the storm raging outside, stronger than the accusations, stronger than fear itself. By the early hours of dawn, the board's resistance began to crumble. Some members withdrew quietly, recognizing that their opposition was futile against a leader who had reclaimed his moral authority. Others were escorted out, anger etched into every movement, but powerless in the face of Mo Yifan's unwavering stand. I watched him, soaked from the rain that had leaked through the penthouse windows, still upright, still commanding, yet undeniably human. The man who had once looked through me as if I were invisible now fought with everything he had. Not for power, not for pride, but for truth and loyalty. When the last of the opposition was removed, he turned to me, exhaustion shadowing his sharp features. His voice was low, almost a whisper against the remnants of the storm. "If I lose everything," he said, "at least I'll know it was for someone real." The weight of his words settled deep in my chest. For the first time I understood the depth of what we had created together. Not just a professional alliance, but a bond forged in courage, defiance, and trust. Whatever the city, the world, or even fate threw at us, we had proven that truth and integrity could withstand the mightiest of storms. I didn't respond with words. I simply nodded, allowing the silence between us to speak volumes. That silence carried the promise that, no matter the outcome, we had each other's backs. And sometimes, that was all that mattered in a world ruled by power and betrayal. And as the dawn broke, painting the rain-soaked city in muted gold and silver, I felt the fragile beginnings of something deeper stir in my heart. A connection, tempered by adversity, strengthened by courage, and silently, irrevocably, blossoming into something neither of us had anticipated. The train station was quiet at dawn, mist curling along the tracks like soft whispers of farewell. I clutched a small bundle of belongings, my heart heavy yet resolute. In my hand was a handwritten note, the ink slightly smudged from the night's anxious writing. "I can't stay. I must find my own path. But know this, you have changed me." I had left without a word to Mo Yifan, leaving only traces of my presence and a silent hope that he would understand. The city felt distant, even though it sprawled endlessly behind me. With every step away from the skyscrapers, the flashing lights, and the chaos that had consumed our lives, I felt the weight of the past weeks lift slightly. My village awaited, the fertile valley calling me back to its quiet routines, the scent of earth and fresh rain grounding me. I needed to rebuild, not just the school and the produce business but my own sense of self, independent and unshakable. Back in the city, Mo Yifan searched relentlessly. His name was whispered in offices, hallways, and even over the media airwaves. Yet, he respected my silence, giving me the space I had asked for, even as he quietly funded projects in the valley under an anonymous guise. Slowly, I began to realize that his redemption was intertwined with mine. He had learned to care without control, to act without expectation, and to see the value in someone he once dismissed entirely. In the village, my return was quiet but not unnoticed. Children ran to greet me, hands sticky with paint from school projects, faces lit with curiosity and admiration. I found our small fields waiting, the crops needing care, the earth requiring my hands. Yet this time I was no longer alone. Small improvements funded anonymously allowed us to rebuild the school, repair irrigation systems, and purchase better tools. Somehow, knowing someone far away had believed in us, even without recognition, was enough to spark hope. I walked through the market one evening, sunlight dipping behind the mountains, and noticed a small plaque at the newly rebuilt school. My breath caught. The inscription, faint yet unmistakable, carried handwriting I knew well. "For the girl who taught me to feel." Tears stung my eyes, but I did not let them fall. Instead, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction, not for recognition, but for understanding that true influence, true love, and true care need not always be loud or public. Mo Yifan had chosen to respect my independence, to allow me my dignity, and to act from a place of genuine regard, not power or expectation. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Life in the village resumed its natural rhythm: work, study, and moments of laughter. And yet there was a new sense of peace in every choice I made. I was rebuilding not just the community but myself. I was reclaiming my power, my voice, and my pride. And then one evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, I saw him. Mud on his shoes, wind-tousled hair, eyes bright with hope and cautious anticipation. He had come not as a CEO, not as a figure of authority, but as someone seeking partnership, respect, and understanding. He didn't demand forgiveness, nor did he expect adoration. He simply stood there, present and patient, offering what I could now accept on my terms: equality and acknowledgement. I smiled, realizing that redemption wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic returns. It was about choice, respect, and the courage to act with integrity. I extended my hand not as a servant, not as a subordinate, but as a partner in the life we were now free to shape together. I had left to find my peace, and in doing so, I had given him the chance to discover his own. And in that simple act of stepping back, I had also created the space for a connection grounded not in dependence, but in trust, courage, and mutual respect. I found his handwriting on a donation plaque. For the girl who taught me to feel. Months passed, each day bringing a sense of rhythm back to my life in the village. The morning sun spilled gold over the terrace fields, children's laughter echoed through the air, and the scent of damp earth and fresh produce filled my lungs. I had returned not as a maid or a pawn in a city game, but as the founder of our Village Care Foundation, a small initiative that ensured every family had access to fair trade, education, and healthcare. My hands, callous from both fieldwork and city negotiations, felt powerful in a way I had never imagined. I had built something of my own, something that mattered. I had almost convinced myself that Mo Yifan had become part of a distant memory. Perhaps he had moved on, the demands of the city consuming him again, leaving only the faint trace of our shared days in the office and at the docks. And yet fate, it seemed, had other plans. It was during the harvest festival, a celebration of the village's resilience and bounty, that I first saw him again. Lanterns floated along the river, their warm light reflected in the eyes of children and elders alike. The entire community had gathered, singing, dancing, and sharing food, their spirits buoyed by the simple joys of life we had fought to preserve. And then among the crowd I noticed him. Mud clung to the soles of his shoes, his suit slightly wrinkled, sleeves rolled up as if he had traversed rivers and dirt roads to reach us. His hair was windswept, eyes glinting with a combination of determination and relief. He looked at me, not with the intensity of a man used to commanding rooms, but with something far more vulnerable: hope. My heart skipped a beat. The world around us seemed to blur, the lantern's glow casting a soft halo that separated him from the crowd. People cheered, music filled the air, but my attention was singularly focused on him. He approached slowly, deliberately, as though every step mattered, as though he had rehearsed the way he would come into my life once again, this time on my terms. "Lina," he said quietly, voice carrying over the distant laughter, yet intimate enough that it seemed meant only for me. "I've come for a partnership, and nothing else." I studied him carefully, noticing the subtle changes, the softness in his gaze, the lack of arrogance in his stance, the humility that had taken months for him to embrace. This was not the Mo Yifan of the city boardrooms, ruthless and cold. This was a man transformed, shaped not by power, but by understanding and care. "You don't need to explain," I said, letting a small smile lift my lips. "I understand why you came." He reached out his hand, offering not command, not dominance, but a simple invitation. I took it, feeling the warmth of his grip, the steadiness beneath his touch. For a moment the world held its breath, the festival fading into a quiet bubble where only the two of us existed. Together we walked through the festival, helping children light lanterns, sharing in the laughter of elders, and distributing gifts to families who had once struggled to make ends meet. His presence, once intimidating, now felt protective yet gentle. We were equals in our endeavor, united not by wealth or title, but by shared vision and mutual respect. The crowd cheered when we unveiled the renovated school, freshly painted walls adorned with murals depicting the village's history, and a library stocked with books donated through our foundation. Children ran to greet us, faces radiant, hands sticky with paint and flour from festival treats. I felt pride swelling in my chest, not the pride of conquest or recognition, but of accomplishment, of meaningful change. Mo Yifan knelt to help a young girl tie her lantern string, and I couldn't help but notice the patience in his movements, The same man who had once dismissed every woman, who had hardened his heart against kindness, now knelt humbly among children, offering guidance, care, and attention. It was a quiet revelation to see him transformed so completely, not by force nor by scandal but by genuine human connection. Later, as twilight deepened and lanterns floated into the sky, he took my hand before the entire village. The gesture was simple, yet monumental. No speeches, no grand declarations, just a hand extended, a silent acknowledgement of partnership, respect, and perhaps the beginnings of love built on equality. My breath caught. In that single touch, I felt months of struggle, courage, and perseverance condensed into a tangible bond. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't claiming victory. He was simply present, standing beside me, offering companionship and trust. And I, for the first time, felt that I could accept it fully without fear, without compromise of my dignity. The villagers cheered, their voices merging with the music and the crackle of lantern fires. Parents smiled, children laughed, elders nodded in approval. But amidst the celebration, I realized that the true victory was not public acclaim. It was the quiet, unspoken transformation that had occurred between Mo Yifan and me. He leaned closer, voice soft, private. We did this together. And now I hope we can continue side by side. I nodded, heart steady. Side by side, I whispered back. For the first time since my arrival in the city, I felt complete. The journey from mud-soaked docks to corporate offices, from humiliation to respect, had led me here, not to wealth or status, but to purpose and partnership. We had built something that neither scandal nor power could destroy. Something real. Something enduring. As the lanterns drifted into the night sky, I felt a quiet contentment. Not of complacency but of fulfillment. I had reclaimed my village, my voice, and my dignity. And in his presence I had found trust, partnership, and the rarest gift of all. Someone willing to grow alongside me, not above or below. When he took my hand before everyone, the mountain wind carried our promise. Not a declaration of ownership, but a covenant of mutual respect, courage, and shared vision. And in that moment I finally didn't flinch. When he took my hand before everyone, the mountain wind carried our promise. Some hearts freeze to survive. Others melt to begin again. I often think about that now, sitting at my desk in the small study of our village foundation, the night settling quietly around me. The crickets sing in the darkness outside my window, a steady rhythm that reminds me life moves forward, even after storms have passed. I hold my diary close, pen poised, ready to capture thoughts that have taken months to settle into clarity. The journey from my mountain village to the city and back has been a whirlwind of emotion, growth, and self-discovery. I remember the first time I saw Mo Yifan, the way his gaze cut through me like a blade, sharp, cold, dismissive. I had expected disdain, ridicule, perhaps even violence from the world of wealth he inhabited. What I didn't expect was how deeply that first encounter would challenge both of us. Not just our perceptions of each other, but of ourselves. In those early days, my hands were rough, my clothes simple, and my heart heavy with responsibility. Every step I took in the city felt precarious, as if I were walking on a tightrope strung above failure and humiliation. I was acutely aware of my insignificance in his world, the village girl, the outsider, the one who could so easily be dismissed. And yet, I chose to stand tall, to speak honestly, and to act with integrity, even when every instinct screamed to shrink, to beg, or to hide. What I learned in that crucible of conflict is that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, unassuming, and steadfast. Courage is keeping your dignity when others try to strip it from you. Courage is speaking the truth when lies seem easier. Courage is holding your ground not for pride, but for purpose. And when courage is recognized, it has the power to change more than circumstances. It can change hearts. Mo Yifan was one such heart. At first he seemed impenetrable, a fortress of arrogance and control. But beneath his carefully crafted exterior was a man shaped by betrayal, pain, and fear. He had learned to push everyone away, to guard against weakness, to believe that kindness would be exploited. And yet, through patience, honesty, and silent acts of bravery, I had begun to melt that frozen heart, not by demanding affection, but by simply being true to myself. It was a revelation I carry with me every day. Love, trust, and respect are not transactions. They are not tools to wield or prizes to win. They are choices made repeatedly, often quietly, and they are strengthened through trials, honesty, and empathy. I have seen firsthand how genuine care, even from the most unlikely source, can heal wounds that seem permanent, and how allowing someone to act with integrity can awaken the best in them. Returning to the village, I discovered that empowerment comes not from wealth or influence, but from taking responsibility, embracing knowledge, and nurturing your community. We rebuilt the school, expanded healthcare access, and created opportunities for young people to thrive. Watching children learn and grow, I realized that the lessons I had carried from the city, courage, perseverance, empathy, were just as vital here, where life is slower, simpler, yet no less challenging. And then there is the quiet acknowledgement of partnership with Mo Yifan. Not romance in the sense of obsession or possession, but partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. He stands beside me, not above, and I beside him, not beneath. Together we have proven that the bridges between worlds, mountain village and skyscraper office, poverty and wealth, fear and courage, can be crossed when integrity and care guide every step. In the stillness of the night, I reflect on the choices that shape this journey. Leaving the city that morning, stepping onto the train, choosing independence over dependency, it was not an act of pride but of self-respect. Choosing not to cling, not to demand, not to compromise my principles allowed both of us to grow, to learn, and to see each other as equals. In giving space, I received clarity. In holding firm, I witnessed transformation. There were moments when fear threatened to overwhelm me, the scorn of colleagues, the media frenzy, the whispered doubts that perhaps I was out of my depth. But in each moment of challenge, I remembered why I began. For my village, for my promise, for the belief that a single act of courage can ripple far beyond its origin. And indeed, the ripples reached him. They reached our community. They reached me. I now understand that love, true love, is not about possession or control. It is not about wealth or power. It is about recognition, choice, and mutual respect. It grows in the quiet spaces where two hearts see each other fully, without pretense, and decide to walk together. Not because they must, but because they choose to. It is about standing together in storms and in sunshine, in struggle and in triumph, equally invested in the well-being of the other. Some nights I sit by the window, looking out at the lantern-lit village, and feel the echo of that first encounter in the city dock. The cold rain, the towering figure, the dismissive gaze. And I smile, remembering that it was precisely that moment, and every moment that followed, that brought me here. That night, when I refused to beg or bow, planted the seed for transformation, not just in him but in me. I have learned that saving someone is not always about heroics or dramatic gestures. Sometimes saving someone is simply showing up with honesty, resilience, and courage. And sometimes saving yourself requires the same virtues. Through this journey, I have been saved more than once. First from fear and despair, then from dependency, and finally from the misconception that strength requires silence or submission. Life continues in its simple rhythms. Children learning, villagers working the fields, the foundation thriving, and Mo Yifan quietly helping in ways that honor independence rather than impose authority. The city remains distant, but its lessons linger. Reminders that compassion and courage are universal languages, and that the smallest acts can yield the greatest impact. And now, as I close my diary for the night, pen still warm from writing, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. For the trials, for the mistakes, for the moments of fear and hesitation. For every act of defiance and every choice to stand firm. For the man who once rejected every woman, who now stands beside me not as a master, but as a partner. Sometimes love isn't born from perfection. It grows from ruin. Sometimes courage isn't loud. It whispers through the heart and echoes through the world. Sometimes kindness doesn't seek reward. It changes the course of destiny. And sometimes a village girl can teach a man with a frozen heart what it means to feel, to care, and to love. That was my journey, from mountain soil to city storms. If you believe kindness can change even stone hearts, tell me your story below.